The Spotlight brought to you by Beacon Plumbing.
Fentanyl is the drug du jour in the headlines, and for good reason. We've told you about its addictive, deadly grip, but it's not the only scourge on our streets. There is more meth out there tonight than ever before. It's stronger, cheaper, easier to find, and harder to quit, leading more people than ever to hit the pipe and sink deep into meth madness. And this drug has a long and sordid history.
As a matter of fact, a number of very violent and bizarre crimes have been tied into prolonged methamphetamine use.
Most people associate methamphetamines with the Faces of Meth campaign from a decade ago that raised awareness about the harm it did through a shocking series of booking photos. But the drug's wild history goes back much further than that. People like stimulants. They always have. The ancient Chinese knew this and used the ephedra plant to make teas and powders that gave people energy. Ephedra was used in many traditional Chinese medicines. In 1885, a chemist working at Tokyo Imperial University named Nagai Nagayoshi created a synthetic liquid version of ephedra and called it ephedrine. 2 years later, a German lab came up with pseudoephedrine, a salt form. In 1893, Nagayoshi tweaked one of the molecules in ephedrine and came up with a more powerful stimulant that he called methamphetamine. But at the time, no one really had a use for the liquid. Nearly 2 decades later, in 1919, a protege of Nagayoshi created a crystalline form of the drug that was easier to handle, crystal meth. Still, it didn't really take off. In 1927, a researcher at UCLA named Gordon Ailes resynthesized the formula with a slight change. He tested it on himself and noted that it caused an energy boost and a sense of euphoria. Ailes patented his formula, calling it alpha-phenylethylamine, or amphetamine. It was nearly identical to methamphetamine, but it hit the brain and the central nervous system a little slower and less intensely. Ailes sold his formula to the drug company SmithKline & French. In 1932, they brought it to market as Benzedrine, an over-the-counter nasal inhaler to treat asthma and congestion. Soon after, a pill form was introduced and used to treat everything from narcolepsy to depression, obesity, alcoholism, even schizophrenia. By the Olympic Games in 1936, athletes were using Benzedrine as a performance enhancer, which wasn't illegal at the time, and racking up gold medals. The Nazis, who were hosting the games, were hard at work on their own version. In 1937, a drug called Pervitin hit the shelves in Nazi Germany. It was full-on methamphetamine. The Nagai Nagayoshi formula, Pervitin, was sold in pill form and in chocolate bars. The Nazis then approved meth for their army troops and tank crews. They used it to stay awake and alert for days during blitzkrieg attacks. Hitler reportedly loved the stuff. He was getting daily shots of the drug from his doctor for most of the war. By 1945, he was a psychotic, raving madman with rotting teeth. Benzedrine was also having a moment during the war. An estimated 200 million tablets were given to our GIs, while the British went through 72 million methadone pills, a form of methamphetamine under a different brand name. After the war, many returning GIs still wanted their fix. Sales of Benzedrine soared. In 1942, Abbott Laboratories won FDA approval to sell methamphetamine here in the States under the brand name Disoxin. Disoxin is still legal with a doctor's prescription and can be used to treat ADHD and obesity. Because of Disoxin, meth is classified as a Schedule II drug, meaning it has medical benefits but has a high potential for abuse and severe addiction. Other Schedule II drugs include fentanyl, morphine, and oxycodone. Meanwhile, bennies, as Benzedrine came to be known, remained popular post-war, despite warnings about side effects including psychosis. By 1945, it was estimated 500,000 Americans were using amphetamines. In 1949, the patent of Benzedrine expired. Several pharmaceutical firms got in on the game. Starting in 1951, Benzedrine required a prescription, something that wasn't much of a barrier, with many doctors and clinics happy to oblige willing patients looking for diet pills. Bennies were big with beat poets. Jack Kerouac claims he wrote On the Road in 3 weeks, fueled by bennies and coffee. By 1962, it's estimated that pharmaceutical companies were producing 160,000 pounds of amphetamine salt per year, enough for everyone in the country at that time to take 43 10-milligram doses. California and several other states realized they had a problem with bennies and Disoxin and cracked down on doctors and pharmacies doling out prescriptions. That opened up the black market. After the Second World War ended, there was a surplus of used war motorcycles and returning vets who didn't want to live by the rules. Out of that combination, outlaw motorcycle clubs started to spring up across the country. Many of the members had used bennies during the war and continued to fuel their cross-country runs and wild parties with the drug. When states cracked down on the pharmaceutical industry, the bikers became chemists and began manufacturing operations, cooking up crystal meth and funding their lifestyle by slinging speed from one end of the country to the other. The Hells Angels went from a ragtag assortment of motorcycle clubs to a multi-million-dollar outlaw corporation. The bikers mainly used a chemical called phenylacetone to create their crank, also referred to as P2P or phenyl-2-propanone. Back then, it was used to clean swimming pools and sold across California and the Southwest. At the same time, the pharmaceutical industry tinkered with molecules and tried to keep their diet pills on the shelves. But by the late 70s, there was a groundswell growing against them.
Let's talk about prescription drugs now. With extended use, can they be dangerous?
Prescription pills are definitely habit-forming, and they are primarily stimulants. They should be used only under the direction of a doctor. They may be dangerous for a patient with a heart problem or high blood pressure.
In other words, then, that means that extended use of those pills can be very dangerous.
They are definitely habit-forming.
The pharma companies came up with a molecule called PPA and kept diet pills in various forms on store shelves for another 30 years, despite warnings.
I've seen people in the hospital who've become, frankly, psychotic on medications like these.
And high-profile stories about otherwise young, healthy people who took a few too many and had a stroke.
Could I have a bottle of Go Power, please?
Tracy took diet pills called Go Power. They're not only sold over the counter, they're actually on the counter in many stores. The pills contain a common drug, phenylpropanolamine or PPA, the key ingredient in many more popular diet pills, such as Accutrim and Dexatrim. Tracy took 2 more than the recommended dosage.
It would take 30 years for the FDA to ban PPA. In 1980, the feds classified phenylacetone as a controlled substance, cutting the outlaws off from the large supplies they needed to fuel their labs. The feds thought the speed days were over, but the clandestine chemists changed course and went back to Nagayoshi's recipe using ephedrine. Ephedrine was legal, sold in nutritional stores and popular with bodybuilders.
If you combine that with a specific dosage of baby aspirin and caffeine, it creates a real potent fat burner.
Pseudoepinephrine was also popular by this time in cold medicines like Sudafed. You only have to change one molecule in ephedrine and you have stronger, more addictive meth. Business picked up, and by the 90s, meth was everywhere.
I've heard from chiefs and sheriffs in cities large and small, in counties that are rural, about what's happening because of meth in their community. Some law enforcement officers have called it the most lethal drug to hit the streets in 30 years.
In 2004, the FDA banned supplements containing ephedra. 2 years later, pseudoephedrine was banned in cold medicines as part of the Patriot Act reauthorization, making it nearly impossible for meth chemists to make ephedra-based concoctions. Gone were the days of trailer-to-table meth, also of exploding trailers and motel rooms, something the news covered all too often. But what's old is new. P2P meth is back in a big way.
P2P meth is what we're seeing throughout the Pacific Northwest. It's what is the highest purity level of meth that we have seen. It's all being manufactured in Mexico.
While phenylacetone is a controlled substance in the U.S., it's used in all kinds of industrial settings, making it easy for cartel-front companies to have it shipped into Mexico, where it's cooked in industrial-grade batches. Advancements in chemistry allowed cartel chemists to become more efficient with their operations, flooding our streets with cheap poison. Like this 70 pounds of crystal meth that deputies from the King County Sheriff's Office took off the streets in January. Canine Fury led deputies to the massive score. The meth had a street value of $1.2 million. They also scooped up 38,000 fentanyl pills worth about 300 grand. It's that kind of action that allows drug lords like the Sinaloa cartel's El Chapo to become billionaires, while low-level dealers shoot each other for a couple of bucks in downtown Seattle, Tacoma, at Everett's Casino Road. Cops will tell you where there's meth, there's violence, bad decisions, and guns. The drug was at the center of the senseless shootout last week that cost Pierce County Sheriff's Deputy Dom Collada his life. The suspect's wife telling the Spotlight Jeremy Dayton lost his mind to meth in the days and weeks before he shot it out with deputies.
He showed up to pick up my daughter the day that he grabbed her high as a kite. I've never seen him that way. He was like moving his fingers and like he was on, I talked to his probation officer. He said it was methamphetamines.
Researchers say long-term meth users end up with golf ball-sized holes in their brain. They clearly need help. But that's gotten a whole lot harder in Washington state as our legislature has decriminalized drugs. I asked Pierce County Prosecutor Mary Robnett about that.
There can't be a referral to the prosecutor for prosecution until there have been 2 law enforcement referrals for treatment. To my knowledge, law enforcement doesn't have any real means of referring anybody to treatment or tracking it. So I don't think we've gotten any referrals from law enforcement for a possession case since the Supreme Court ruling in Blake.
So the intent there was to try to get treatment for these people, but the mechanisms are not in place to make that happen.
Right. I don't think there are mechanisms or funding.
What would you like to see the legislature do when it comes to illegal drugs or hardcore drugs in our state?
Well, I wish there were a means of forcing people who need treatment into treatment. That's not a prosecutor's stamp. That's a human view. People who are addicted to drugs and whose lives are in shambles, it's inhumane to let them live on the street, and use narcotics and commit petty crime. It's just inhumane. I would like to see a means of forcing someone into treatment. I'm not sure the criminal justice system is the right vehicle. Maybe the Involuntary Treatment Act is the right vehicle, but something.
An update now on a homicide case we have been following closely here on the Spotlight. The cold-blooded murder of 52-year-old Reno Mayava, gunned down in broad daylight at 3rd and Pine on a Sunday afternoon in Seattle. It's an area notorious for drug dealing, where meth heads and fentanyl fiends steal, stroll, and stumble around with impunity. This week, Seattle police arrested a suspect accused of shooting Mayava 5 times. And it will come as no surprise to you, he is a dangerous repeat offender. 44-year-old Marcus Cheney already had a felony warrant for his arrest for allegedly robbing a marijuana store in Lake Forest Park on January 21st, when King County prosecutors say he opened fire at 3rd and Pine on February 27th. Video shows dozens of people scurrying for safety. Seattle police found Reno Mayava on the ground on Pine Street where he fell. He'd been shot 5 times. According to the court documents, Cheney told police he shot Mayava after an argument. He claims Mayava threatened to slap him, but, and I quote, he was not going to let another person put their hands on him. When Cheney was arrested at a Tukwila motel this week, police say he had all of these guns with him and admitted to committing multiple armed bank and marijuana shop robberies. Cheney is a convicted felon with a long, violent history, including first-degree robbery in Pierce County. He was sentenced in 2011 and got out of prison in 2019. Then was in and out of custody for probation violations several times before police say he kicked off his most recent crime spree, including a case in which detectives say he shot an employee at a bank in the Soto area of Seattle 2 weeks before Mayava was killed. The last month since Reno's murder has been torture for Mayava's fiancée, who returned to the scene with me the day Cheney got caught. Today, you're getting justice for Reno.
We sure are.
And you're here at the spot where he was gunned down.
I am.
What's this like for you tonight?
It's a bit emotional, but I'm getting some good justice out of this. So, for Reno and his family and myself.
Knowing what you've learned so far about the details of how it went down, what are your thoughts about this guy that killed this love of your life?
I'm sure he has a love of his life too, and I'm sorry for that, for the choices that he's made in his life. And I can forgive, I can just never forget. And I just hope that maybe one day he'll learn from this, or at least feel what I have to feel every day without Reno.
I know you miss him, but is it make it any easier knowing there was an arrest?
Yes. Yes. 100%.
You're looking forward to having your day in court, aren't you?
I am. I want to see him face to face.
What do you think Reno was thinking that day when he was in this argument, according to the documents?
I can't even imagine. I don't know.
Yeah. You know, you and I talked about Reno's mental illness some of his self-medicating. You know, we've really been digging into this, and there's a lot of people that their lives are really being destroyed by these drugs. You know, meth, for example.
The big one.
Yeah, and they just don't think right.
Right.
You know? Do you think there's a lot of families out there that have lost ones that are still hanging out in these areas?
Absolutely. Everybody down here has a loved one. There's somebody's brother, sister, aunt, uncle, mom, dad.
Yeah.
There's somebody's something.
What do you think about being here?
I'm uneasy, but yet a sigh of relief. So a little bit of both. Very emotional.
Yeah, I can imagine. You think
There's
Seattle
too
can
much.
clean it up?
No. There's too much. There's too much homelessness. There's too much drugs. There's too much.
Yeah.
You know.
I mean, if Reno's death could mean something and draw some attention to it, that would be a good thing. People to remember.
I hope this is what becomes for Reno. I hope that him and the 15-year-old boy and anybody else that's been hurt down here. This is sad.
What was that like for you when they put video out and then made an arrest in the murder of that 15-year-old, but Reno's case had not been solved?
I was trying to be sympathetic for their family because I understand what they're going through too, but I didn't understand why they got theirs but couldn't get Reno's, and it was in the same area. But now I know why, and I appreciate that, and I'm so appreciative of the Seattle PD, anybody that was involved, and most of all you, for being caring and compassionate, being there, because you're a wonderful, wonderful man.
I'll be there for you always. While researching this week's show, we stumbled upon a real gem in the archives. It's an incredible and true story from 1995. It could be the inspiration for the hit show Breaking Bad.
The Bonnie Doon home was loaded with lab equipment and all the chemicals needed to make methamphetamines, or crank as it's known out on the streets.
Orange. Methamphetamines. Yeah, he's got that prepackaged for sale.
And the methamphetamines seized by drug agents was also 99% pure.
That's so dry. I've never seen that like that.
Then they found out the suspect, Mark Caddy, has a PhD in biochemistry. But the story got even more interesting. You see, Caddy is a researcher at UC Santa Cruz.
When he was stopped on the UCSC campus and stated that he was en route to deliver some methamphetamine.
But police now believe there is more of that methamphetamine trail. In fact, they believe that there was more than just sales on campus. They believe that some, if not all, the drug was manufactured here at a university laboratory. So Department of Justice investigators scoured over the university lab, and they say they found some chemicals that are used specifically in methamphetamine production.
In conjunction with doing some legitimate research, he was also on the side manufacturing methamphetamine.
Red phosphorus would never be in this lab?
Shouldn't be. We don't have any use for it in what we do normally.
I don't have any idea at this point how long he was manufacturing. We're still in the process of investigating that.
And therefore, investigators have no idea how much crank Caddy may have produced and sold. But consider this, like all researchers, Mark Caddy had round-the-clock access to the UCSC chemistry lab.
I had sort of my suspicions that he may have been using something, but no direct proof. But I'm real surprised that he was actually doing anything beyond that.
In Santa Cruz, Les Batinas, Fox News.
Before we leave you tonight, a warning. Careful who you talk to in Florida. There's a man in Spring Hills by the name of Eugene Colucci. Eugene is a man who likes a fair deal. Last week, he arranged to score meth from another Florida man, but thought the guy pulled a fast one, selling him bath salts instead. So Eugene did what any upstanding tweaker would do. He dialed 911. Cops say Eugene told them he didn't want anyone else getting ripped off. So he asked them to test the baggie he was sold to see if it really was meth. And if it wasn't, to find the man who sold the crooked crank. Cops obliged and informed Eugene there was some good news and some bad news. Good news, the meth he bought and smoked was real. The bad news, he's catching a charge. Finally, if you're struggling with meth or any substance, the time to get help is now. The cartel chemists making these dangerous drugs hitting our streets today don't care if you live or die. They only care about your cash. That's all the time we have on this edition of The Spotlight. Until next time, be smart and stay safe.